Hello, everybody, and welcome to our live broadcast. We're at the Haymarket Media headquarters in Hong Kong, and we're going to be talking to you about this campaign's top 1,000 brands survey. It's obviously kind of a big study that we put out every year, and it's
every year since 2004, I believe, actually.
Matthew Miller, our online editor.
I'm Matthew Miller, the online editor.
Welcome here. We're going to be bringing in other people from the campaign editorial team, running through a lot of the material from it, some of the highlights from the survey that's happened, because it's such an anticipated thing every year. It's an annual survey, obviously, that we do with Nielsen. It's really comprehensive. It covers 13 markets across Asia, all the way from India to Australia. And there are about 17 different categories, main categories in here, everything from food to health products to banking to other areas, and a whole 79 different subcategories. So it's extremely comprehensive.
In fact, I think we're fairly certain that it is the largest survey of its kind of consumer brand recall and brand loyalty that takes place across Asia Pacific. So we're quite proud of the work that we put into it, which is why we thought we'd share some of it with you today.
Exactly, and every year, of course, people want to see who's in the top 10, who's number one. They tend to be fairly, solid from year to year. But this past year, we had, in the past, 5 years, we've had Samsung at the top. Actually, in the past 6, I believe.
This is the 6th, yep.
And so everyone was wondering, who would come out top this year. But we'll get to that in a moment. We'll talk a little bit about kind of who topped the survey. We had a number of new categories also this year. So we had sports leagues for the first time to get the take on kind of which professional sports leagues are the most popular in Asia. Also looking at consumer electronics is always changing. So every year we sort of shrink some categories, like camcorders. We kind of collapsed into cameras. Other areas, though, pop up like wearables and kind of smart home technology. So we want to keep up with that. Online payments was another new one. We're going to be talking a bit about that later on too, about some of those categories. But I should say a little bit about how the survey is done. Our friends at Nielsen conduct the survey every year. This year they did it in about a 2-week period in March, and they will basically contact about 400 respondents from each of the 13 markets, except for some of the bigger ones, like India, where they'll contact 800, China, 1,200, and that way we sort of get more of a representative sample from the heft of some of these brands in the big markets. The question that was asked, and this is what everything hinges on, was to each person, when you think of this particular category, what's the best brand that comes to mind? And by best, I mean both most trusted and sort of the one with the best reputation. So that will go into a score. Then they'll ask for the second best brand in that category. And from that, points will be tabulated. So categories are important because the more categories that a brand is in, the higher the score it can be as well.
I think that best feature is kind of another unique thing about this, because it makes the survey sort of immune to rapid ups and downs over 1 year, and a little bit more resistant toward that, but measuring perhaps a little bit better long-term brand loyalty, which a brand can build up over a long time. And obviously I'm foreshadowing our discussion of Samsung that we're going to get to in a little bit here, but I think that's a neat thing about the survey.
Right. So obviously we want to get to some of your questions if you have questions to put to us. One of the issues around the methodology, though, is that we don't have as much insight from direct respondents into why exactly they thought a particular brand is number one. So we know that it resonates, we know that it's number one, that it's trusted, that its reputation is high, but we have to sometimes dig into it ourselves as editors, kind of look at kind of what's happened with the brand, and we can bring some of that analysis to people, and we're going to be doing a bit of that today. Yep. So we'll look at that. We also asked, there was a third question this year, an additional one, where we got actually some insight into what constitutes brand, what makes people loyal to a brand. If there's time, we'll get to that, but again, that was something else that we asked this year. And there, the key points were that just basically it's product quality, even though as much as we talk about things like loyalty programs and stuff like that, people really want, a product that works, number one, and customer service and issues like that are very important too. All right, but let's get to, anyway, some of the findings, because yes, so once again, Samsung topped the top 1,000 brands again this year. We were wondering about that because they didn't really have a great year.
Yeah, I wouldn't say that we were hoping to see a change, but we were kind of surprised when we didn't, because obviously the Note 7, the Note 7's catching on fire was one of the biggest news stories for us of the last year. But interestingly enough, it didn't seem to change the ranking. So
yeah, I think there was the Note 7, which obviously had, I think, the biggest, probably potential impact from a consumer point of view. I mean, every time people go to the airport and are warned not to use this particular Samsung product, that has to be damaging for the brand. What we've heard from people, and our colleague Fayez Samadi wrote a great article about this in the magazine,
yep.
Where is that the people looking at this said, one, they were, I remember initially in the first couple weeks, Samsung may have waited a little bit, but then acted pretty rapidly and really sort of took responsibility for it, said, okay, this is our fault. Once they did decide to, have on a wide scale recall, they pulled it out. Then they said, we're going to investigate the findings. Then, they published those findings in January. And after that, it became quite a transparent process. And that's something that a lot of people have cited.
Yep. Another feature that you'd find in the magazine or on the website goes a little bit into the work that Samsung did on an advertising front to sort of recover from what happened with the Note 7 and lead into their very critical launch of the Galaxy 8. Smartly, they started off, before they did any real advertising, they started off with a really calm video showing a lot of people in white coats and in a very clean lab and tons and tons of batteries and scientists looking at them, and went through very carefully what they were changing about their processes to make sure that something like that wouldn't happen again. And then after they let that sit for, I guess, a few weeks, they came out with a really big piece of tentpole advertising starring an ostrich, if you might remember, wearing a VR headset and dreaming about flying. And so that sort of set the stage to get back into talking about the great products that they actually do make. And then from there, of course, then they went into the Samsung full-on marketing mode with different kinds of promotions and video content all over the world. We can't even keep up with all of it in this region. And hopefully you're seeing the ostrich on screen now. There he is.
And it's the Galaxy S8 that really helped them turn the corner, and that was sort of key to see whether or not sales would really take off. And once they did, and again a lot of it was the word emphasizing brand safety there, and the phone safety. Then they were able to to kind of move past it, I think, fairly quickly. The other sort of major scandal that we didn't talk about this year was the vice chairman of Samsung and de facto leader, basically Lee Jae-young, being involved in the giant sort of political scandal to hit Korea. There again, we've kind of when all the people that we've talked to said that has a lot more potential to hurt perhaps a company's stock if they feel that leadership will be affected, etc. Less so when it trickling down to the kind of consumer level. Something like a Note 7 consumer recall is a much sort of more resonates a lot more with consumers than kind of a political scandal that's a little bit further removed. The other thing, as you mentioned, we were talking about categories. So this is another reason why Samsung did so well is that they cover a vast array of categories. So a couple of the new ones this year were wearables, where they're strong, and they also showed up in the smart home networking category. So even though we kind of collapsed some categories, they came up in others, and they're such a big company that they benefited from that. Maybe we can look at some of the rest of the top 10. They tend to, like I said, these are a lot of familiar names to the top 10s from past years. Apple was unable to basically take over the number one.
Yeah, and we talked about Apple elsewhere in the coverage in terms of their work as well. So there's sort of an interesting parallel between the work that they're doing on an advertising front and their product lineup or their status as a company right now. They don't seem to have quite as much sizzle as they perhaps did a few years ago on either front. Their advertising is still very fine and nicely made, and they do a good job of hitting the the product benefits, but until they reach their next product cycle and introduce that iPhone 8, perhaps with some more exciting features, they're sort of in a holding pattern. I think an interesting question that brings up is whether smartphones, in general, can create the kind of excitement and sexiness that they once did, because as most people are aware, that they're sort of at the top of their capabilities, and they're only making sort of small incremental gains in each new generation. So maybe that's not going to be such a hugely exciting thing when Apple comes out with its next iPhone, or Samsung with its next Galaxy.
Mm-hmm. So again, we saw Sony there, Nestle, Panasonic, the top 5 really unchanged. The only main change in the top 10 is LG inched ahead of Nike. They sort of switched places for 6 and 7. Chanel, Adidas also came in there. Canon fell out. We're going to talk about that a little bit longer. This was the year that the camera brands really took a walloping, not just Canon, but Nike as well. Sorry, Nikon. And the new entrant is actually not a new one, but a return for Coca-Cola back at number 10 this year.
Mm-hmm.
I thought that was quite interesting, because they were as high as number 4 a decade ago,
yeah.
And slowly movement towards more nutritional drinks, and just kind of the more information people have about health and nutrition. Sugar water doesn't really do too well in that category, and it started to slide down to the point where it was about number 17 3 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
But they've managed to come back, and so one thing they had this year was they did change to kind of a one brand strategy, where they made Coke Zero and Diet Coke and all their other brands have sort of a similar feel, and some kind of were questioning it, saying that well, is that really a great kind of brand strategy? But they want everyone to have that same sort of Coke experience, they argue. So they did this worldwide. They put a lot of effort into it, and that was one thing that they did this year. But I think what's kind of probably changing more for them is that they're trying to adapt to that kind of push towards being mindful of nutrition, and by selling a lot smaller portions, for starters. So more kind of sales in that direction. They've even gone as far as to come out this past year with something in Japan called Coca-Cola Plus that has sort of a dietary fiber in it. It arguably will suppress fat absorption, and it's one of the few. They managed to get actually the Japanese government to sort of certify it as kind of a food with an intended health use. And normally, I would be skeptical, but in Japan they're pretty thorough with food and food quality.
Okay.
So,
and it's certainly interesting to chart their return to the top 10 against their main rival Pepsi in this region and around the world. I think you may have seen some of that on the screen as we were chatting, and we'll talk a little bit more about the brand comparisons that you can do on the Top 1000 website shortly.
Mm-hmm. A couple other highlights to mention. One was that Instagram beat Twitter this year. It was number, I think, almost like halfway through the top 1,000 just a few years ago, but it's now kind of moved its way up all the way to 161. Instagram is extremely popular throughout Asia, but especially in markets like Malaysia, where about close to 3/4 of those that are connected are users of Instagram. Hong Kong, Singapore, also big markets. So it's done really well. They managed to kind of, copy some features from Snapchat, do a little disappearing act when, people don't want, some material around. But the other thing that they sort of did in Asia is that because, Instagram is so popular with food and, restaurants and that kind of thing, they really reached out to small businesses and kind of added features where, consumers could reach out directly to the small businesses. So kind of, I think some of that other work may be paying off. And then in contrast, Twitter just seemed to have a really bad year this year. As far as the news flow, you would probably vote for that.
I'm probably the most guilty of being a Twitter user among us here,
But just a string of departures, you did just a lot about trolling this past year, so I just think it was just
basically not reaching the expectations that Wall Street has had for them on an advertising front, has sort of infected the whole public image of the company, I would say.
Exactly. I also want to mention Visa and MasterCard. They also, both of these got big jumps this year. Now, they were included in a new category, which again is, to online and e-commerce payments. A lot of times, sort of, people think of PayPal, and PayPal did sort of top that category, as well as obviously in, Alipay, WeChat, especially in China, were players there. Visa and MasterCard, didn't really kind of register there, really far behind in China still, but in the rest of the region, they did really well even in that category too, and a lot of people kind of, don't realize, what a boon in a way e-commerce is to some of the, these credit card companies. It was also sort of pointed out that perhaps an extra boost came in India unexpectedly when the demonetization happened in November, and suddenly major bills were gone from the system, and people had to look for cashless alternatives. Suddenly, the credit card use, you got a bit of a boost there. So those are some of the highlights. There's obviously a lot more, and we're going to be talking about more of them too. One thing that we're doing this year, obviously everyone can go to our site at campaignasia.com and look sort of at the top and kind of get into the top 1,000 brands site. And what they have to do is just do a quick, probably 60-second registration when they get in.
Yeah. We really hope that you'll find the content that we're talking about today worth your 30 seconds or so to register for this site, to get in and read it. And if you register for the site, you'll be receiving our daily bulletin, which we think is worthwhile as well. So hope you'll join us by taking that step. I'm going to turn, I think, if you're set, I'm going to turn and talk to some of the actual features of the Top 1000 website, which we've put quite a lot of work into, and we hope you'll enjoy. So right there, I think my colleague hopefully is calling up the pages as I talk. So right there on the main page, that's where you can explore the top 1,000. You can scroll down and you can keep going all through the whole 1,000 there. If you click on any of the brand names there, you'll see that brand's performance from 2004 through 2017. And give that a second to come up there. And then once you get into this section of, which you can also enter by clicking on Brand Analytics at the top of the menu there. Once you're in here, you can change the brand that you're looking at. Or if you pull down that menu on the, go ahead, that's fine. Just choose like AirAsia there. Great. So here's AirAsia, and there's their performance. Obviously, they've made some inroads since 2005 was their first year in the survey, I think it was. So once you're in here now, you can change the brand, or you can actually select multiple brands from this pull-down menu on the side. If you wanted to compare, say, Cathay to AirAsia, you can do that. And you'll get that graph in a moment there, which is a nice feature, obviously. And then if you use the tabs there, you can also see those brands' rankings by country. If they this means their performance in a specific country. You can choose whichever one you want. All right, very good. Right, and then for some of the brands, we have ad spend data. What we've done is each year the top 100 brands we've collected ad spend data and put that into the database that this whole thing is driven off of. So you'll be able to see that as well. And then if we return to the top menu and move over to the battle of the brands. This is a section that we decided to have a little fun a couple years ago. We built these interactive features that compare two brands in a number of categories. So we have Apple versus Samsung, and Coke versus Pepsi, McDonald's versus KFC, down to some of the, Canon versus Nikon is one. Why don't we look at that one if we can. So what we did was we just charted the two brands over the time and chose some of the highlights from what that brand did in each year in Asia if we could. So those are kind of fun to explore. You can see they pop up here, and you can go back and forth through time by sliding that thing at the bottom. But then there's a couple of other exploration choices at that Battle of the Brands menu at the top. Excuse me. Yeah, there you go. So if you wanted to compare two brands, you could choose Compare Brands, and you can make your selections there. I guess we actually did this before, didn't we? When we were in the other section. So there's multiple ways to get into the data and start poking around. And then the last thing there is categories. So we've chosen, if you just click that there, we've chosen some of the major categories, and you can just choose that. And in, for example, alcohol and tobacco, I think it's all alcohol. We chose a basket of brands that belong in that category, just for easy access to see, how the competitors in that group have fared against each other over time. All right. And then the next thing that you'll want to see is the stories section, which is, this is basically where we stretch out and put some words to some of the things that we've been talking about here today. And I think it's interesting for people to note that for the price of the free registration on the website, this is more or less the same content that appears in the magazine that subscribers get this year. So we certainly think it's worth taking a look at. So we have stories that delve into who's hot and cold, who are new entrants in the survey this year versus who are leaving. And then we look at some of the work that some of the brands have done. And we also delve into some sector-specific things like FMCG. And I think that's all that I was going to cover for now. And we're going to turn to the new entrants now. And I'm going to hand off my mic to one of my colleagues, Sun Chen, to talk about that.
So Sun Chen's coming in to talk about new entrants too. I should just add too that since we're really proud of them, they look really nice in the magazine too. You'll also just see a lot of the stats broken down through beautiful infographics that we have lined up. So it's both dispersed with that as well as graphics that show kind of what are the brands that are moving up and are moving down. The hot and colds, why brands moved this year. We'll get into that a little bit in just a moment too with Olivia. But Sun Chen, you're here to talk about of the new entrants this year and the new categories that we had.
So hi, I'm Sun Chen. So as Robert has mentioned, there are several new categories for the top 1,000 rankings. There are actually 5 new categories: ride sharing, online payment system, wearables, smart home tech, and sports league. So I'm going to talk about Uber because Uber is the best performing new entrant in this ranking system, peaking at 19 from the overall ranking. So Uber actually has very specific campaigns, and they have ventured into Uber Eats for this since last year. So I spoke to the marketing team from Uber, and they mentioned that for Uber Eats, they are actually tapping into very specific consumer insights. For example, in Tokyo, they launched a campaign they partnered with Volvo to launch a campaign because they know that Japanese consumers, they are very obsessed about fine dining. So they are partnering with Volvo to deliver the food to the subscribers. And also Grab also did pretty well at 58 this time. So Grab is actually more prominent in Southeast Asia. They are all in almost all markets in Southeast Asia, launching in Yangon recently. So Grab is more into local campaigns. For example, they launched a Grab a Durian campaign during the durian season in Singapore and Malaysia. And they have also recently partnered with Tinder to launch for people to meet new people while they are rides, but actually not exactly new people. They're actually meeting celebrities, which are joining the campaign. And just like Uber, Grab also, they have ventured into other things other than ride sharings, because Grab, for example, they have bought a e-payment system, e-payment platform in Indonesia. Then because the markets, many of the markets, still have a large percentage of unbanked population. So they also have e-payment system, not the e-payment system, e-wallet for people to pay their rides, because many of them, they don't have credit cards. So moving on, I want to talk about.
I just find it interesting too that Uber did so well, and yet even in some of the markets, they've had obviously legal troubles, battles with local, taxis and so on. Even in Korea, where they're basically limited to kind of providing certain specific services like assisting kind of disabled or elderly, etc. They still managed to rank quite high. So I'm kind of wondering almost if some of the controversy just serves their brand recognition, anyways.
I spoke with Nielsen and one of Stuart Jamieson from Nielsen, and he mentioned that Google is actually solving public transport problems. For example, in Southeast Asia, their public transport system is not as developed, And it's very hard, and there's a lot of safety issues. Even though there are safety issues that affects Uber, and a lot of people are saying that, well, the governments are saying that it's not really safe, as in they are not really regulated, but it's actually solving the problem, as in it's very hard for people to hail a cab, and many of the taxi drivers, they don't have a very good reputation in those countries, so it did very well in those markets, and yeah.
I think it's interesting to see, how they go from, here on, if they can, again, to sort of, sustain that
Well,
recognition or
except
not.
in China, which they exited, and Hong
Right.
Kong and Taiwan, where they are still having legal troubles.
Yeah.
But they are still doing very well in Hong Kong, both Hong Kong and Taiwan. So next I'm going to talk about wearables. So for wearables, as Robert has mentioned, Samsung is also in wearables, and wearables, and one of the analysts that I spoke to, because he said previously a few years ago, if you are going on a diet program and you want to lose weight, you just jump on a scale and every morning to see how much you have lost, and it's not really a very accurate method. And so for people, the health awareness is picking up, and a lot of people are jumping on the fitness bandwagon. So it's actually addressing the needs, and you can really check like how many steps you have taken and how much calories that you have burned for the day. But just as one of the analysts has pointed out, as difficult as it is to pick up on the fitness regime, so they are trying to prevent people from dropping out from using these things like Fitbit. So many of them, like Fitbit, they have a platform to engage consumers, the users. They actually have competition among themselves. Like they have workout the day and see like who scores the best, to encourage people to keep using wearables.
So you mentioned before that a lot of the incumbents that are in there do quite well, like Samsung, but Fitbit was one that did okay as a new entrant,
It's
right?
at the top 5, at number 4 and number 5, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah.
But Apple actually did pretty well too, because
Yeah.
of the ecosystem. Like a lot of people have the Apple products, and what Fitbit can do, an Apple Watch or a smartphone, an iPhone can do as well.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
yeah.
Speaking of being athletic, we decided to look at sports leagues this year.
Yeah.
So
Well, for sports, NBA did very well in China and Philippines, those two countries where they have a very strong
Yeah.
NBA tradition. And also, EPL also did pretty well in markets like Thailand, Malaysia, and especially in Thailand, where a Thai company owned the Leicester Club, and they won the EPL League last year, and you can see. And also, we can go a little bit into NBA, why NBA is doing so well. Perhaps it goes all back to Yao Ming during that time when he was signed on
right.
as an NBA player. And NBA does very well in all the Chinese-speaking countries, Hong Kong, Taiwan, and China. And you can perhaps remember the Linsanity when one of the Taiwanese American player, when he was signed on when he helped one of the clubs to beat Kobe Bryant for that year. Well, it created a lot of buzz on social media during 2013 or 2014, if I'm not mistaken. Okay.
I noticed also Formula, One did quite well.
Quite well in Singapore, despite rumors of it exiting, but it's still staying on, obviously.
And in Japan and Korea, probably not a surprise. Major League Baseball
Yeah.
obviously did quite well. They contribute sort of a number of players.
EPL is number 1 in South Korea, and we know that many of the South Korean players, they have several players on the EPL teams, EPL clubs.
Right.
Okay.
And thanks for that. Thanks for bringing that in. So we also want to talk then now about some of the brands that kind of really, did well. The ones that kind of went up a lot, and ones that perhaps didn't do so well. So again, Olivia wrote this article, Olivia Parker, who's our deputy editor, who's just about to join us. And this is where sort of, some of that camera story comes in, where we basically saw kind of big drops for kind of some of the big camera companies like Nikon, like Canon, like Olympus.
Yeah, I think this is probably one of the most obvious stories of the top 1,000 brands this year, because I think a lot of people know that camera brands aren't doing as well as they have been in the past. But I do think it's interesting that Canon, which has previously been a kind of top 10 stalwart brand, has slipped out of the top 10 and it's now at 12th position. But some of the other brands have done, really badly. Are we okay with sound? Okay. So I think, Nikon, Olympus, Kodak, they all slid down the charts massively. Olympus dropped from 171 to 370, which is just a huge leap, really. I think it didn't help that the camera brands had a difficult year last year. There was this really big earthquake in the south of Japan where a lot of the brands have their distribution factories and warehouses. So that kind of puts them back. But I guess in terms of consumer preference, the main thing is just that everyone's using their mobiles to take pictures these days.
I mean, that's the thing. It's like not even, Olympus is arguably making a switch to all of a sudden to kind of, medical imagery and areas like that, which is all fine. But just when it comes to the consumer recognition, which is what this measures, that's where we're seeing kind of the big drop, obviously.
Yeah. And one of the other less obvious stories that is a trend we noticed that lots of international travel sites have actually slipped down the charts this year, which I think is worth noting. So the big US companies like TripAdvisor, Booking.com and Expedia, they've all gone quite drastically downhill by about over 50 places for all of them. So I think I'd say this is probably a result of a lot of countries in Asia favouring a kind of native brand for their online travel sites when they're shopping for flights or hotels or whatever. So Traveloka in Indonesia it was their first time entering the list this year, but Rakuten Travel in Japan, all of those places are more popular with their home countries than TripAdvisor or Expedia. But it's still worth noting that all of those local sites, they're actually slightly down themselves as well this year. And I think one reason behind that could be that Airbnb is also kind of building its own presence in Asia. And
Is it ever, yeah.
Yeah, and it went up the list this year by 47 places. So perhaps that's, putting some pressure on the travel sites. But perhaps it's simply just consumer preference. People just want to shop around the sites that they use and not so bothered about using the big sites.
We could see even a bigger jump with Airbnb too now that they've just entered Japan as well for next year.
Yeah, exactly. So a couple of the success stories which we found worth noting. We talked about Twitter and Instagram and other social media sites. So LinkedIn actually rose 100 places this year to 491st position. Yeah. And I don't know if this has been noted. LinkedIn still isn't talked about as much as Facebook, is it, or Twitter or Instagram, but it's getting there. And in Asia, kind of unnoticed, it's doubled its number of members in the last 2 years. So it's now got 100 million members. It reached that milestone last August. And it's doing some quite interesting things in the Asian market. So it's launched LinkedIn Lite, which is kind of specially designed for mobiles, and it's for places like India where you get, it's still, data plans are still expensive. So they've built a couple of products specifically for those markets. So I should think they will just keep going up in the future. And another one, probably unexpected, is the rise of WeChat. So we included WeChat in a new category this year, as well as a social media provider. They were also it categorized as an online payment provider, which might explain their success in our charts. So they're the second.
That would correspond with that, massive use in China for everything, right? I think that they, they need to be in that category because they're definitely, the player there. Yeah. Yeah,
exactly. And I think it just was the fact that it's jumped so much is just a reflection of the fact that people are now using WeChat or especially in China, they're using it for so many different things. There's not just social media, there's also bills and search, and it's used a lot at work now for work conversations as well. I think will probably just continue to go up, but I'm not sure about its potential for spreading outside China. It's the second most popular social media site in Hong Kong, but as to whether it will continue to spread.
They've made some efforts to expand into Europe and elsewhere, but I agree. It's just that's obviously WeChat's biggest challenge is to push globally. They've got obviously mainland China in the bag, but it's that's what we'll have to see. I mean, obviously the other players would love to be able to have that type of constant presence that WeChat does, but it's a question of how long basically that space could be open and who's going to fill that void. So that'll be interesting.
Yeah.
Well, what's interesting is so we saw this huge jump with WeChat, but we also saw kind of a huge jump with Chinese brands as well. Generally, I'd say that's another sort of big theme this year. That some of the largest leaps were made by the Chinese brands like Huawei, which jumped a whopping 661 points this year to 202, and I think it's they're really kind of the presence outside of China as well. They're working at kind of like selling stuff like low-end smartphones on the consumer side to competing on the high end. They're really kind of like finding that range in different markets, from especially, like I said, places like India, pretty much right across Asia. They're really hitting all those markets. Xiaomi up 577 places to 216. Again, massive jumper. And, again, it's this kind of breadth of categories that they're able to, produce things, somewhat more cheaply. Enter also the kind of, wide range of appliances in that market. Also in that new category of smart home, networking.
Yeah.
Just managing that expansion there. So huge jumps for a lot of the Chinese brands. And I think what's interesting to me is that in the top 100, we only have one Chinese brand, which is Lenovo. We have 21 Japanese brands. So, based on kind of history and legacy, and obviously with the consumer market, that's a huge dichotomy. But what we're seeing is also that a lot of these Japanese brands, which have been there, forever, often they're kind of big industrials that have sort of consumer component, like like Toshiba and all those kinds of companies. And we're seeing kind of a general erosion. I think 15 of those 21 in the top 100 all particularly drop. Not maybe a huge amount, but it's just starting to see that kind of general erosion. Again, largely with these companies, it's kind of pulling out of those consumer markets that are so hard to compete in if you're kind of a legacy company, and now kind of moving into just kind of more kind of pure industrials or kind of B2B service type areas, that kind of thing. So they're kind of checking out of the consumer market slowly, and there's a bit of a shift going on. So thanks so much, anyways, for coming by and talking about
thank you.
those coming up and those sliding down. One other kind of feature that we have, obviously, as we go, when we kind of look at each country by country in the country rankings, and what we're doing throughout the month of June and into July is that every about 3-4 days we're launching a new set of data about the top 100 from each country.
Yeah, this
Matthew
is
Miller, welcome
yes,
back.
I'm back. Hi. This is probably a little bit lesser known feature of the top 1,000 brands coverage that we do. Everything that we've talked about to this point has been based on the full survey of across all the countries. But we also slice and dice the data according to respondents from individual countries, and then we present a top 100 brands listing for each of the 13 countries that are in the study. So this is how people in China, I think you're seeing now, how people in China rate brands. And it doesn't mean just Chinese brands, it means overall brands. So you'll see that some of the major international ones still show up at the top. And in fact, their top ranking in multiple countries is what brings them to the top in the regional ranking. But you'll also see, the lesser known, if you don't live there, local brands showing up. And it's a lot of fun to look through those lists. And yeah, we've released, I think, 5 of them so far: India, Indonesia, China, Japan, and Singapore. Hong Kong coming up next week, South Korea, and then the rest. You can see the schedule there on the site. And in addition to that ranking, we've also tried to present a package of information on each of the countries that's covered. So we have some infographics about just some sort of basic facts of population and consumer spending in each country compared to the APAC average. So those are fun to look at. And we also have prepared 4 features for each country. So Nielsen prepared sort of an economic backdrop kind of piece. One of our staff members wrote an analysis of what happened in that top 100 ranking, who was up and who was down. And then we did 2 Q&A sort of features where we asked people in the market, experts in the market, to talk about what's special about that market from a consumer point of view, and then also to sort of delve into the prospects of local brands versus global brands and what's happening with that sort of dynamic in each market. So we hope that you'll continue to join us and look at that stuff over the next few weeks. And that's it.
All right. Well, I think we've talked a lot about the top 1,000. So, that's why we'd love to,
I think there was one question.
viewers.
I think there was a question that came in. Is
Yes.
that right?
I think this is Soon Chen would probably want to talk
Okay.
about this.
All right
The
then.
question is, basketball is popular in Asia as a recreational activity, but what have they done themselves to promote it specifically at the consumer?
Thank you, Rick Boost, who is our video journalist who's behind the camera today,
Yo!
giving us that question.
Okay, hi, I'm back. So I spoke to Mike Kitts. I asked him about it during a conference in China recently, and he said that it boils down to the very nature of the game basketball itself, because it's very easy that you can have a court, or you don't really need a court to play basketball. And basketball was brought in, or NBA entered China in the 1980s, and since then the government, actually the Communist Party, has been quite active in promoting it. And recently they have built a basketball indoor theme park in Shanghai, and they also know that the Chinese consumers, they are very big into watching live streaming, and one of the important aspects of the game is that you have to watch it live when it's played in the States, and many of them, they have partnered with at least 10 media partners to stream the games live to the consumers, and they have also recently partnered with Tencent to have live streaming on mobile. And also in Philippines as well, another country where NBA is huge, they have partnered with the telco companies to offer live streaming. And I forgot to mention that in China, actually to cater to tap into the Chinese culture, they actually have a Chinese New Year celebration since 2012 that they have launched, NBA launched Chinese New Year campaigns for China. And another point that Mike mentioned was that because basketball is a very visible game, the NBA stars, they are icons themselves. So. They constantly bring in players to China to meet the fans, and it's one of the important factors that boosts the popularity in these countries. All right.
Great. Thanks for that answer, too. So, thanks everyone for listening to our broadcast. We hope you will, go ahead over to campaignasia.com and have a look yourself. Go through, check out your favorite brands, see where they're at, compare them with, their competitors, and take a look at how they've done over the past few years. There's a lot of information here, and really it's it's meant just as much as anything else to be a resource for everyone to come and look when they're kind of looking at doing their own kind of research on various brands. So thanks so much for joining us. We will wrap it up here, and we'll be back hopefully with another live broadcast soon. Thanks so much.